All right, I think we're going to get started. We'll let the stragglers come in as they get here, but welcome to your last session of the day. We are here for respecting experiences, learning from the rookies, and we have Koen to speak with us about that topic. A little bit about Andre is he's an energetic presenter, powerful communicator, and a dynamic teacher. He integrates his abilities as an improvisational comedian, large group facilitator, keynote speaker, and classroom teacher. He captivates and educates his audience, and these skills have become the hallmark of his sessions as a consultant and facilitator. So with that, I'll give you Andre.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say thank you all for being here. Love when people volunteer for mandatory sessions. I love that. Also, I know this is the last session, so I'm going to try to make sure that I'm mindful of our time, because I do not want to be the thing standing between you and going home, right? So I don't want to do that. And also, my dad is a Pentecostal pastor, so what that also means is that time for him is eternal. So his sermons go on until they're done, and I don't have that luxury. So I'll be mindful of our time and make sure that we get out in time. Which also means that experience growing up under under my father has tempered me in a number of ways. And so there are ways and worldviews that I have because of my upbringing that I cannot ignore. I can't ignore those things. They are a part of who I am, and would be remiss if I didn't share those and acknowledge those. Simultaneously, I've been given, I've achieved awards. I have been given privileges, and I've also inherited things that I didn't ask for. And one thing I would encourage you to do is to ask yourself, of all the things that you are and all the combinations that make who you are you, which of those things were things that you accomplished? Which of those things were things that were given to you? And how many of those things have we not even asked for? So I'm a cisgendered male, which means that my biology and the way I identify myself are asynchronous. They are in sync together, right? So I present as male. I am heterosexual. I am married. I have the pronouns that I use for myself are he, him, and his. I have matriculated through higher institutions of learning, so they've certified me to be a master in my particular discipline, given their curriculum. I would say that I'm probably lower middle class and upper lower class, right? I'm not sure how that line gets drawn, right? Or who draws the line. I also was a Head Start student, which meant that my parents brought me up at a time when they were below the poverty line, so I needed special assistance through those programmings that Head Start offers. I'm 6'2". I'm mildly attractive, and I'm extremely humble. And in all of those things, I have privileges that are oftentimes associated with any of those particular identities. And if I'm not mindful, then my privileges can become weapons for someone else. When I expect that people, or I have the entitlement that people will be able to do or say or think the same way that I do, then my privileges become a weapon. There are certain things as a man I don't have to think about. I really don't give much consideration. Like where to park at night. I don't really have to think about that. And when I am thinking about it, The last thing is that I'm concerned about is my physical harm. Those are things that I don't have to think about in terms of my physical harm. And so I want us all to think about ways in which we've been privileged, either through the accumulation of something or through our birth and birthrights that could be used to harm other folks. And so we all come with a set of privileges that we must be mindful of, right? I mean, what's the most dangerous thing about having a blind spot in the car? What's the most dangerous thing about that? You can hit someone, right? And what else?
If you don't know it's there.
If you don't know it's there, that's dangerous because someone else could hit you as well, right? And so we have to be mindful of those blind spots. So my name is Andre Koen. I also, outside of doing this consulting thing that I do, I also teach at Bethel University, and I teach in the education department. So we spend a lot of time working with pre-service teachers, preparing them to go into the classroom to make sure that their learning environment is equitable for all of their students. So this particular conference, I really was excited to hear them talk about this idea of equity. And so when I talk with my students about equity, we really engage and we lean into this. And I think you'll also find it pertinent for this idea or this conversation around generations in the workplace. Because, well, I don't want to give away my punchline. But so when we talk about equity in my classroom at Bethel, one of the things that we talk about is the CHS Stadium. We talk about the CHS Stadium. Has anyone been to the CHS Stadium? Isn't it a fabulous facility? It's absolutely fabulous. And one of the things that they went, when they built the facility, they went for the goal of not being fair. Part of their goal in the building and the establishment of that particular space was that they wanted to make sure that fairness was not a part of how they do business there. I know some of you are like, huh? So anyone ever been to the Target Center? Right? Been to the Twin Stadium? Right? Yeah. When you go to those big, Excel Center, ever been there? Right? Yeah. During the intermission or the halftime, what two activities happen during that time?
Beer and bathroom.
Beer and bathroom, and in whatever order you can get it, right? Yeah, so people go to the concessions or they use the restroom. Now, what are the restroom? What is the restroom experience like for men, and what is it like for women?
Women have a line.
Women have a line.
Not usually at a sporting stadium.
Not usually at a sporting stadium. Okay.
Depends on
But oftentimes in those big convention areas, there's a line for women, and there doesn't seem to be the same kind of line for men. And does anybody know why?
Because they stand cheek to cheek at the urinal.
Because they stand cheek to cheek at the urinal. Okay, that's not my thing, but apparently she knows.
Women bring guests with them.
What's that?
Women need a place to talk.
Women need a place to talk. Okay.
No,
Women bring guests with them.
What's that?
They invite other women to go.
They invite other women to go in, so they go in twos and threes. Yes.
Yeah, men have a trough.
Men have a trough. Okay. It basically boils down to the fact that men and women use the bathrooms differently, right? They use the bathrooms differently, and I have found the answer as to why it takes women so much longer.
We wash our hands.
All right, sister. Right? Yeah. And not only do they wash their hands, but they're also writing letters.
What?
Yeah. In the stalls, they have these little silver mailboxes. Wah, 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 wah. Just joking, just joking. No, but so the CHS Stadium and the St. Paul Saints said that we want to make a stadium that is unfair. Unfair. What I mean by that is that for every male bathroom, there are 2 female bathrooms. Unfair. Why? They want equity in their space. They want equity in their space. So equity in and of itself is unfair. And what did your parents tell you about fairness? Life is unfair, right? But I always think it's interesting when we talk about jobs and opportunities, blah, blah, blah. People, I want it to be fair. But your parents didn't even buy that, right? So this idea of equity is extremely important. And so when we talk about this idea of generations in the workplace, what we have to recognize is that oftentimes we're trying to get similar things, but the ways we do it is very different. All right? So what I'd like for you to do is put your name on your handout. Put your name on your handout. And if you spell your name correctly, you get a gold star. Now I want you to draw 5 circles that have that are large enough to put information inside of. So 5 circles that are large enough to put information inside of. And in each one of those circles, I want you to put one thing that you value or that is important to you. It could be a place like Belize or Bemidji. It could be a thing like a cabin or a motorcycle. It could be a person like a significant other or a grandchild. It could be a concept like justice or hope. One thing that you value in each one of those circles. All right, it looks like most people have 4, if not all 5. What I want to do now is I want to play a game, and the game is very simple. What I want you to do is to go around the room and find as many people as you can who agree with what you have on your paper, or they have something similar to what you have on your paper. When I say agree with, they say, oh, that is a good idea. That's a great thing to value. I also value that, and I'll sign on that. All right? So at a minimum, if you get 2 people for each one of the things that you value, at a minimum, how many signatures should you have? 10. 2 for each one. So if you have 2 people sign for each one, you should have a minimum of 10. All right? So people who either agree with what you have or have something similar on their paper, I want them to sign on those circles. You have 90 seconds to do this, starting now. All right.
Yeah, you can sign them all. That you agree with.
Yep, you're good.
Mine.
Sleep, anybody put sleep? I did sleep.
I can't. Did you get mine? So you can sign my face.
Well. I'm trying to empty circle because I go with anything.
That's true. He's got married.
I still did
Maybe here.
60 seconds.
I lost mine.
Do it anyone?
Music.
All right, what do I got?
Oh, good work.
switch?
Sure.
There's no penalty if you get too many. No penalty if you get too many.
I didn't get that far.
Oh, okay. It's really interesting that it's interesting. I didn't
I didn't either.
Now you find everybody with another two, so I
I got one somebody else got music. Don't surprise me.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and game over. Game over. So more than, if you have the same person who signed on your paper more than once, that counts. So what is the total count that people have?
Exactly 10.
So you have exactly 10.
Down to the wire.
All right.
12. I got 12, but now everybody agrees with it.
Okay, you got 12, you got 16. You got 16. 9. Anybody have more than 16? 19? Who's got 19? Okay, you guys have 19. Sweet, 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 sweet. Let's give it to the overachievers. Thank you for ruining the bell curve, all right? Yes. Oh. He said the overachievers are always recognized. Let's recognize the underachievers, right? So I'm actually, lots of people are overwhelmed. I'm just trying to get to a place where I'm whelmed. At any rate, as you were going around the room, were there things you saw in other people's papers and you were like, man, I should have wrote that down. Why did I write that down? What were some of those things? Music.
Hope.
Hope. Freedom. Relaxation. Health. Cool. Were there things that were either difficult to find someone to sign on, or you actually didn't find anyone to sign on?
Yep.
What was one of those? Shoes! If having, buying, or wearing shoes is of value to you, please raise your hand. Which I find it very interesting. For transportation people, I have not seen anyone with flip-flops on, which is very interesting because the weather's been nice enough that particularly when quasi-government employees see a little bit of sun, they put on flip-flops, which is kind of funny. Other things that people had difficult finding people to sign on. Education. Please raise your hand if you value education and it wasn't written on your paper. Okay, cool. Life. Please raise your hand if you value life because you have one. Right? So good. So what do you think is the pretty obvious objective of this particular activity? What are we going for in this activity? So priorities, what's that? Everyone has different values. To get to know other people, right? So kind of cross-pollinate people.
I think there's a lot of commonality in the values.
Oh, you saw a lot of commonality in the values. All right.
Not a single person had any of my.
Every single person had what?
Nobody had anything.
Okay, so as an example.
Like nobody had. Well, some of them are too obscure. Like they're just names, which I didn't know they were supposed to be taught. But I had food and travel, and I didn't see anybody else.
Please raise your hand if you value or think food is important. And if you think it's important to get to the food, that would be travel. Right? Yeah. So I want you to write this down. Just write this down. So this is a new definition of diversity that I want you to write down. That diversity is our commonalities and our differences. That is true diversity, right? I know that I've been to a lot of trainings, many of which have been mandatory, where the presenter is talking about diversity stuff, be it cultural competence, whether it's inclusion, implicit bias, whatever, but we usually end up talking about our differences or our similarities, but never both simultaneously. And so I would encourage you that an authentic conversation about diversity is both of those things simultaneously. Because that exemplifies our humanity. We are not a single thing. For example, I wasn't born black. No, really. It's not a reverse Michael Jackson thing, you know. I'm not taking pills or anything like that. No, I wasn't born black. 1970. I'm in the hospital. I'm born. The doctor does they did some really weird stuff in the 70s to babies. Really weird stuff. Like, for example, if a baby got stuck, they would go get these salad forks, and then they try to force the baby's thing out, and it would mess up. It would mess up the head. I mean, here's an example, right? But the doctor took me out, he hung me upside down, and he did something, again, one of these archaic things that they did in the 70s, and he slapped me. And so I did what any self-respecting young man would do, and I slapped the doctor back. That's actually an old Richard Pryor joke, and the only one I can tell. So the doctor hands me off to the nurse. The nurse starts my vitals, how long I am, how much I weigh, so forth and so on. And she gets to the part of the paper that changes my life forever. Race. And back in the 70s in Dayton, Ohio, there were 3 choices: black, white, and other. So she looks at me, she looks at her list, she looks at my parents, she looks at her list, she looks at me, she makes her decision. Check. What decision do you think she made? Black. But sometimes I fantasize. What would my life have been like had she picked something else? I don't know. I mean, it's just a fantasy, right? Just a fantasy. But then I started thinking, what was I before she made her decision?
You were a baby.
I was born human, but America made me black. America made you Irish, Swedish, Scandinavian, yeah. Before we were put in these small little boxes in these containers, we were absolutely perfectly who we're supposed to be. Generations in the workplace is another form of these boxes that we try to put people in. To say that there is something inherently or uniquely different about us. And I would suggest that there's not that much. Here's another thing I want you to write down on somewhere on your paper, that context is everything. Context is everything. Context is everything. So I'm going to skip a little fast forward a little bit so we can get to some meat of stuff, and then we'll come back and backfill. I want you to go to page 5 in your handout. We have copies of the PowerPoint, and we'll pass those things out. You obviously have this worksheet, and on the website is also the full PowerPoint. But I really want to spend this time as a working session for us to have conversations with real human beings, right? So the first thing I'd like for you to do is, on page 5, I want you to create your family constellation, or more commonly kind of referred to as your family tree, right? As best you can. If you can go back 3 generations, deaths and divorces count, blended families count, and if you're if you've separated yourself from all your biological relatives, however you make your family, that counts. Whatever your family looks like counts. All right? And I want you to go back 3 generations. So, yourself, a parent, a grandparent, maybe a great-grandparent if you can, whatever your constellation is. All right? And if you don't know names of folks, just, however you want to identify them, that works. You don't have to have names of individuals.
Oh, I did not start this well.
All right, as you're creating that family tree, I want you to put a star by anyone in that family tree or that family constellation that is notable or notorious. Someone who's notable or notorious. Someone who is a success or a scallywag.
That's most of them right there.
Someone who is known for being positive or someone who's known for being negative. So if you can put a star by a person or a few people that are known for either their positivity or their negativity. Somebody who gets talked about in your family, whether positive or negative. All right. For one of those individuals that you've starred, what I want you to do is to just select one of them and put what are some of the characteristics of that person. What are some of the characteristics associated with that person? Like, why do they get talked about? What are the characteristics that keep getting mentioned about that person? Either positive or negative, whoever you've selected. All right, and in association with that particular person that you just wrote about, what context were they in that these attributes either developed or were important in? So as an example, were they in the United States or outside of the United States? Were they in war? Were they in a rural community, a farming community, in a big city? Was there a time frame that was important to recognize around where these skills or these attributes might have been important? All right. So I'm going to set the timer, and I'd like for you to have a conversation at your table, just about your family constellation. Feel free to share what you want. You don't have to share what you don't want to share. I'll set the timer for 5 minutes, and if you can just kind of talk about either your thought process as you were creating your family constellation, or some things that you started to notice as you were forming your family constellation. All right? So 5 minutes starting now.
A lot of people. These are my siblings. 15. No, that's all from the same age. Good Catholic family. You didn't have a hobby apparently. Well, I asked my mom once if we were off land, and she said yes, and I said she's a liar. Nobody's seen plants. And I asked my dad one time why, and he said free labor on the farm. Was God at work out for you? He said, I've been better off hiring a couple of people. So that's my family. My dad was victorious one, and my mom was mean. My dad was well known around the area. She's very outspoken, and it's hard to say. She didn't take it. That's it for me.
I'm going to get what I do, kind of thing.
Lunch out of the order. Yeah, maybe no character in lunch, so I started thinking about it. Some of that was my example. Really hard circumstances and military drug use, having to make a living on a farm or make a living
Oh, really?
I'll show you. Like, you can't do that. I'll show you. She overcommits everything. She has a business with this and this and this and this. So she realizes she's thinking 3 hours apart, right? You can't do this. No, it's impossible. But she keeps doing it. She wants to do everything. You know what's strange is if something's going to go wrong, like if somebody's going to have a car trouble or miss their flight, it's going to be hard. It's like there's a little black cloud over her head. The most unfortunate thing for her, because they happen so often, she's just like, we're like, no, wait, what are we going to do? My dad he never graduated from high school, but he had a passion for flying. Become a Northwest pilot.
He was making good money, definitely up in middle class. And then, 1964, he had a heart attack. He responded by buying cheap wine and drunk all day every day. Screaming and yelling, throwing furniture around. It was pretty ugly. Friends of his found him a job. They didn't even bother going out. And he settled down. He was just one of those bitter, angry people. It was nice. You're welcome. I just did it for the sympathy, the truth.
Friend did the job up here in the cities, and he ended up working with a gal that was from our hometown, Lonsdale, Montgomery. He was like, you know, the peers, and she said, yeah, I know the peers. They're a nice bunch of people, but they're wild. And it was so funny when the last time I was in court with my mom, the judge ruled on my name. And when he asked me, he goes, Alice, is this the last one yet? And she said, no.
4, 3, 2, 1, and so I'm curious. I don't want you to share other people's stuff. Just think about your own things. But as you were listening to other people's stories, and you were thinking about your own constellation, was there anything that started coming up for you as you thought about those people that you gave a star to, that either were really positive or really negative? What came up for you as you were going through that process?
Joy.
Joy?
Mm-hmm.
All right. In what?
In just remembering the way she was.
Okay, so joy in remembering the way she was. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Other folks?
I'm more negative, the scallywag as you call it, and I felt like I was being very judgmental.
You felt like you were being very judgmental. All right.
The things that I thought were bad made them bad, not necessarily any sort of universal.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right.
I mean, I think that they were universal, but I think that.
Did you come up with that on your own? Are you the only person who thought that of them?
No, I don't think so.
No, you don't think so. No. Because that's important. That's important, and we'll come back to why that's important in just a bit. All right? Other folks, as you were thinking about that influential person, whether it's negative or positive.
I think for me, I just, kind of what he was saying, things that I view as important, that's how I passed on my judgments of what success is or something that stands out based on what's important to me.
All right. So you kind of pass that on, or you talk about it, or you think about the world in a particular kind of way, and this person may or may not have lived up to that.
Well, in the cases I did, because I went towards success, they did.
Oh, okay.
But maybe someone who achieved success, who would think that they've achieved success, it may not have been something to stand out to me.
Okay. Cool. That's fair. Yes, ma'am.
I guess somewhat similar to what you said, unsure, because the grandparents and great-grandparents, I never knew myself.
Okay.
It's all secondhand stories from family members and whatnot. Not saying that it's not true or not, it's just unsure because I haven't experienced them.
Right.
Whether it's negative or positive,
So some stories that we get, we're not even sure if, like, what the truth is, right? So, example, love my mother. Sometimes my mother has a tendency to exaggerate. So sometimes it's not clear exactly what went down because I'm not sure where the line is. Yes, sir.
Ryan's great-great-grandfather and my great-great-great-grandfather fought against one another on the same field of battle.
That is crazy. That's wild. And how are you guys getting along right now? Is it cool? Like, right? No, that's interesting. That's very interesting, right?
Did both of your grandfathers come off the field?
Mine was captured 3 days later and was a prisoner of war for 2 years.
Mine did, but he was wounded 3 times. He was shot 3 times.
Wow, that's important information. That's cool. Thank you. Thank you. Other things that you noticed? Or...
Well, Sue and I both picked our fathers, and they were like mirror images of each other. And both World War II veterans, the greatest generation.
Humility
Really,
was a big,
just the characteristics that we each wrote down were just, mirror images.
So they could have been brothers. Could have been brothers, right? What do you think about that greatest generation made them the greatest generation? Because we've talked about that. I mean, Tom Brokaw did a whole great series on the greatest generation. What do you think caused them to be known as the greatest generation? You said sacrifice, okay. Survival. Work ethic. Perspective.
I think coming out of the Depression, because one thing that my parents told me, because I have older parents, was that the Depression was a great equalizer, regardless of your race, creed, or wherever you came from. Everybody was affected the same. I think it took a lot of prejudices people had and threw them aside because everybody was just trying to survive.
Okay.
I think that might have leveled how they might have felt if they'd been raised differently, but I think it was just so devastating. Like even my parents, when my dad died, I had to throw away 600 cooler poles. I mean, they kept everything. They did not throw anything away. Nothing. I mean, that really must have impacted them to never want to throw anything away ever.
And not just, I mean, unless we're related, because both my grandmothers, that was the case, right? We spent more time getting rid of stuff that was collected, and particularly from my point of view, I didn't see any value in this stuff, but my grandmother certainly did. In her bones, she felt.
They might have needed it.
Right?
Or somebody else.
Or somebody else did, right? So those things have some pretty profound impacts on us. One question that I asked, and I really want you to kind of think about, and again, I'm talking about this greatest generation, right? There were the world required a certain kind of tenacity to make it in that environment, right? I mean, the coming out of the Great Depression, going into the continuation of World War I, right? Going into there was a certain kind of tenacity that was necessary, given the oppression that was facing people, right? So context is everything. They would not have been great had they not had great challenges, right? In circumstances, right? Absolutely. So when we talk about this idea of generations, we have to recognize that the context that we're coming out of really flavors and it gives us a particular worldview, because there are certain challenges that face us in particular times. One of the things, I love my grandmother, and when she passed, I was really devastated. I had a really hard time with it. She was one of my favorite people on the planet, right? Mostly because she did what grandmothers do, and that's love you unconditionally, right? So I could have been the biggest stinker, whatever. It didn't even matter because my grandmother loved me. So, but I also thought she was nasty. like disgusting. Like I was like, I love this woman, but she's disgusting. Because she would just do bizarre things. Like, so we would spend Saturdays with my grandmother, and we would play Yahtzee and dominoes and paint by numbers. Anybody remember that, right? Paint by number. So she would do all that stuff with us and do puzzles and all this kind of stuff. And she would make breakfast for us. And breakfast for her was toast and tea. That was breakfast for her. And she preferred what she would call preserves over jelly or jam. Right? So we go over and visit my grandmother. She's making toast for us for breakfast, and she would open up her preserves, and sometimes there would be this gray mold stuff in her preserves. And so what my grandmother would do is get a spoon, scoop out the gray, throw it in the trash, and then serve the preserves. That's disgusting. Ugh.
That's penicillin, you got inoculated, didn't
I
even
got
know it.
inoculated, didn't even know it, right? Or cheese sandwiches. She would make us Braunschweiger and cheese sandwiches. Anybody remember Braunschweiger? Right? Yeah, Braunschweiger and cheese sandwiches. And if the cheese had mold on it, what would she do? She cut it off. She told us it was Swiss cheese because it had holes in it. No, why did my grandmother do that? Because she was a child of the Depression. She was part of that greatest generation, and you didn't throw good stuff away. And it took years for me to even understand why my grandmother was the way that she was. And unfortunately, it was a little too late. It wasn't until after she passed that I was able to put all these pieces together. And so, once we understand the context that people are coming from, we understand their behaviors. I would imagine that people who make good or bad decisions were making those good and bad decisions out of their context. Out of their context. Trying to adapt to their context. And let me just tell you that when we try to adapt to our context, our adaptation will always be inadequate. It'll always be inadequate. My parents did the best they could with what they had to raise me. And it wasn't enough. They could have never taught me about sexting.
Are you self-taught?
Right? Why could my parents have not ever have taught me about that? Yeah, they could have never envisioned it. It never existed when they did that. The same thing goes for, actually, for many of the careers that we had. There are very few people who could have taught us that we could have the kind of jobs that we even have, right? And so we have to recognize that we're all trying to adapt to our context. A couple of other things. So if we go back to page 2. And by the way, I want to say thank you so much for taking a risk and sharing with your colleagues things that could be controversial. So I appreciate that. Thank you for doing that. So if we go to page 2, what we have to recognize is that there are 4 truths of human beings that I want us to really engage in. And the first is that human beings can learn, change, and grow, even if we don't see evidence of it. Even if we don't see evidence of it. I'm sure that there was a behavior that you had, or a way of thinking, or a way of doing something that your parents were like, I can't wait till they stop doing it like that. Please stop doing it like that. Whether it was biting your nails or chewing on pencils, I don't know. But for me, it was dragging my feet. And I don't know why I did it. I don't even know if I could do it today. But when I was in 6th grade, I would walk and drag my feet like this. And I'd make this kind of scuff sound with my shoes, drove my parents mad. And maybe that's why I did it, right? Drove them mad. And I also wore this down coat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I was comfortable, but it got funky in there. So I had a solution for the funk. I just sprinkled lots of Brut Flavouget on myself. To this day, I can't smell. I just can't smell, right? You know, Brut covered everything, right? For you. So at any rate, I'm growing up. So all this stuff. So human beings can learn, change, and grow. Lo and behold, today, I don't walk like that. But I also am responsible for buying my shoes and my pants. So that might have something to do with it too, right? So human beings can learn, change, and grow, even if we don't see evidence of it. We have to recognize that. Next is that people do what they think works, even when what? Even when it doesn't work, right? And what has given the illusion that this thing works? What has given that illusion? Because it's worked once, right? It's worked once. Mr. Adrian Peterson had to take a year off of his job because he didn't understand this. Why did Mr. Adrian Peterson have to take a year off of his job? Because he spanked his child. I think with a switch. I think the official word is he whooped him. I don't know how you spell that or what that means, but he hit him with a switch. Now, Mr. Adrian Peterson is very articulate. He has a very decent command of the English language and communicate rather well. And so when asked why he hit his child with a switch, What was his response?
Parents did him this way.
Because that's how I was raised. So a lot of times when we operate, we're playing tapes, we're operating with mindsets, with worldviews that have been handed down to us, but we fail to recognize that the context has changed. So it's not popular to discipline your child that way. So I'm a new parent, right? So my daughter is 2.5. And we went shoe shopping the other day to get dancing shoes. Any shoes that she likes, she calls dancing shoes, right? So we went and got her dancing shoes, and so she's practicing the dancing in the store. She gets a little further than what I want, so I start calling her, and her name is Phoebe. So I said, Phoebe, get over here. Phoebe's not working, and so I said, Phoebe Inez, that's her middle name. I said, get over here. And then the final thing is, if I just call you by your middle name, it's on and popping, right? So I call her. I said, Phoebe, get up. I said, Inez, get over here. And she runs over, stiff arms. She looks at me, and she says, calm down. I'm like, oh, it's me one more time, one more time. But sometimes my wife will text me and say, your daughter had a rough day, something's going on, I told her that, so I'm the disciplinarian in my house, right? So that's my job. And I take that because I have to earn the big piece of chicken. So that's how I earn the big piece of chicken, by being the disciplinarian. So when she says, wait till your daddy gets home, I'm the daddy she's talking about, right? So I come home, and I've already got the text of what went down. So I come in, I'm ready to regulate on this 2.5-year-old. I'm ready to bring it. I got Thor's hammer in one hand and Zeus's lightning in the other. So I come in the door, boom, I bust up in the door. My theme music is playing in the background. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Right, so I'm in there, I'm like, I said, young lady, did you do blah, 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 blah? Yes. You're gonna get it. I want you to sit in timeout for 2 minutes. This hurts me more than it hurts you. Okay, come here. Right? No, we discipline our children differently, right? But I ask her questions way more than my parents ever asked me questions. I deal with stuff with her way more than my parents ever dealt with me, with the hopes that this creates a more whole human being than beating them into submission. Now, one of the things about Mr. Adrian Peterson that I do want to say to his defense is that I find it interesting that the system who used the violent beating of people to have them succumb to a situation that they would have normally not been a part of now holds him to a higher standard than what his folks were taught. His parents didn't invent spankings or using switches. They didn't invent that. Neither did his grandparents or his great-grandparents or his great-great-grandparents. They didn't invent that. But here he is replaying a tape. And of course, he is responsible for what he does, just like we're responsible for what we do.
Well, I thought it was interesting that very few people even know what transpired and led to him whipping his son. I'm someone who grew up, with corporal punishment, and the fact that, does anybody know what happened? I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead.
Does anybody know why he whipped his son? Okay, so growing up, I grew up single mother, and I lived in East St. Louis. So, and she worked and she went to school. And my neighborhood wasn't the best neighborhoods. And me being disobedient had real ramifications. She said, yeah, look, I'm going to school, you stay in the house. If I go outside, people die. So it was important for me to listen to what she said. And we had one TV, we worked at Koen, right? So the quick and easy fix was corporal punishment, right? Adrian Peterson whipped his son because his son had put a plastic bag over his younger son's head, you know, which could have killed him, you know, if he hadn't noticed. So that's, you know, was he justified or not? I guess it's a different conversation. But I think it should have been germane to the topic of actually what happened.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. You and I should talk. So I spent a lot of my adult life in St. Louis, and spent some time over in what we called the East Boogie.
There you go.
Yeah. So so a lot of those things are contextual, right? So if you don't understand the context, you don't understand the behavior. And I would suggest, again, going back to those people that we starred, that their context dictated a number of their behaviors. So let's go to the next one. And I think this is still germane to what we're talking about, and we can continue to talk about Mr. Peterson's case, but I'd rather talk about your case, right? Which is that all human behavior is goal-directed. We're all trying to achieve something through our behavior. Our behaviors aren't just random, right? Even when kids can't articulate what their goals to their behaviors are, we know that there are some goals, and we'll talk about what those goals are in just a second. And lastly, that an attitude is a reaction to goals. Our attitude is a reaction or response to goal achievement. Just think about a young person that you had in your life. Think about yourself as a young person. When you got what you wanted, what kind of attitude did you have? What kind of attitude did you have when you got what you wanted? A happy, positive attitude. And when you didn't get what you wanted, what kind of attitude did you have? Right? A negative attitude. And so a lot of times we talk about attitudes around, you know, the emotional displays and all that kind of stuff, when in fact it is telling us everything about goal achievement. So if I have a customer, client, community member who is kicking lots of attitude towards me, or even an employee who's kicking attitude towards me, what do I know about them before I even hear their complaint? What do I know?
They're not happy, they're not getting something, they're not getting.
There's something that they're after that they've not been able to get, right? And so what's the easiest way to help someone with an attitude? Give them what they want. But what if you can't give them what they want? What if it isn't, even if you could, they couldn't handle it, right? What do you then do for them?
I think you have to at least know what they want.
So possibly know what they want, and ultimately what for them? Help them what?
Toward their goal. Help them change the goal.
Help them change the goal. Help them have another goal. This is not going to happen. So in many cases, I would ask my dad for the car, and dad would say, this is not going to happen. At that point, I've got choices. I can act a fool. What? What are you talking about? I should get the car, blah, blah, blah. What do those set of choices lead me to?
You're grounded.
Possibly never getting the car, right? Or I could take that one on the chin and be like, okay, Daddy, I got you. All right, cool. That's cool. Not this time. Okay. I mean, I can tell you don't love me. No, but it's all good. It's all good. Right? No, so I had a set of choices, right? So I had to set new goals. And the new goal was like, I might not get this one, but I may have it another time, given a set of parameters, right? So lastly, what are humans after? What are they after? And I would suggest that they're looking for significance, belonging, and safety. Significance says that I'm a person with purpose and power. I was born for a reason. I can do something, right? Belonging says that I am in relationships with people who understand my significance. I'm in relationships with people who understand my significance. Think about your friends, your network of friends. Do they understand your significance, even when your family doesn't? Right? I would say in my case, my friends do. And then lastly, I'm safe physically, emotionally, spiritually, and emotionally safe to be in relationships with people who understand my significance. So we're all looking for safety, significance, and belonging. Why do kids join gangs? Safety, significance, belonging. Any combination of those things, right? Why do we wake up and go to work every day? a combination of these things, right?
We're in a gang where we
You want
take
to
money. So we just have different roles.
She said, we're in a gang that makes money. Now, this is one of the things I think is very interesting. That so in my studies, I found that the word GANG was associated with slave work groups. That's what they called slave work groups. They called them gangs. And then when we see young people gather together, we call them slave work groups. I think that's very interesting. I don't know.
But they call themselves, they give themselves gang names. They have like their.
Okay, so I
They have
grew up in.
specific names that
Yeah,
they.
I gave my. Yep. So I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and not really known as a big gang city or whatnot. So there was a set of projects, brick homes, kind of stacked in a reserved neighborhood, so to speak, right? And the kids. So there were a group of kids who called themselves. It was called the DeSoto Bass. Was the project's name. I'm not sure what they were. Who was doing the experiment on the project, but that's what they were called, the projects, right? And the kids called themselves the DeSoto Bass Killers, right? Now, this was funny because, it sounded really cool, but it was just a bunch of kids who didn't have anything to do, so they would bust bottles on buildings and break out windows and stuff like that. But they called themselves the DeSoto Bass Killers, and people called them a gang, but they never called themselves a gang. So there are gangs and they have names for themselves, but I find it interesting that other people feel like they have more power to give them a name than other people. So that kind of stuff.
I was just going to comment on that
Yes,
a little bit. It's also true, like in the railroad industry, like heavy rail, they use a lot of terms. The gang, like it's a work gang, refers to a work crew, or an officer. It's all like from the Civil War. So like management is an officer, and then there's
Yeah.
It's weird like how they use the terms. They're still.
No, it's not weird. All human behavior is what? Goal directed. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, what's the goal of the behavior? Oh, that's my
What's
my
your
thing.
girl do?
No. That's my timer. That's my timer. No. But it's important to recognize that, right? So language serves a purpose. How we talk about things and people serves a purpose. And part of the purpose is to dehumanize people. So let's go over to page 3. Oh, no, let me just hit this real quick. Just really quick. So with this idea of safety, significance, and belonging, there's self-interest and social interest, and we need to have a good balance of both of those. Self-interest is Ayn Rand. Anybody familiar with Ayn Rand? She wrote The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. She's a very rugged individualism kind of person. But we all know that many human philosophies only go so far, right? So you can't be an individual. Michael Jordan never won one game by himself. Point taken. Or LeBron James for that matter, right? As cold as he is, gotten close, but as cold as he is. And then social interest is that there should be a relationship between these two. One of the things in the United States that we fault socialist countries about is that they stifle the innovation of the individual. But I also think it's interesting how they show up in education and all these other things. But that's a whole other thing. This idea of inferiority and superiority complex. Anybody ever heard of those kinds of things? One thing I would suggest is that there is no such thing as a superiority complex. There's only an inferiority complex, meaning that we all feel inferior. And that is what it means to be human, is to recognize your inferiority. However, oftentimes when people don't want to deal with their inferiority, they overcompensate, and that overcompensation becomes a superiority complex. Right now, I am 47. I am fighting the urge to get a Ducati motorcycle. I am fighting that urge. I'm fighting it.
Do it.
Because of my inferiority, right? So that, and then we have these mistaken beliefs that come as these tapes get played, right? About what life is and who life is and all that kind of stuff. And then this idea of cultural continuity, which means that culture is constantly changing, and it's changing as it relates to context. Context is constantly changing, and so must culture. Culture must adapt to that, right? So there's that. Page 3 in your handout really talks about this idea or this concept of the human soul, and that there are constantly things that are trying to separate those two things, trying to make us not believe, trick us out of our humanity. Commercials are a great example of that, right? Have you, outside of herpes commercials and the Olympics, actually seen commercials that make you feel good about yourself? Right? Because in those herpes commercials, they're like skydiving and living life, you know. But most commercials, what are most commercials saying about you? You need something. You are inadequate until you buy our product. I love conspiracy theories. Love them. It's like my comic books, right? Just love them. And my favorite conspiracy theorist is Alex Jones. I don't know if you've ever seen Alex Jones or whatever. You know, he's with the Liberation Network. We're here stuck in this abomination. But now that Obama is gone, we have a new terror called the trumped up nation. Right? So he creates all this fear and anxiety, and then right at the commercial break, are you having trouble sleeping? Do you suffer from anxiety? Please take these pills, right? What do we know about this idea that of the body and the spirit being able to be repaired by the purchase of things? Can things repair the human soul when this division starts to happen? I would suggest not. And I get that particularly from a number of avatars who have taught us that this doesn't work, right? Philip Seymour Hoffman, Elvis Presley, Janet Jackson, Chris Farley, Prince, and the one that hurt me the most, Robin Williams. These are all people who are supposed to have everything you're supposed to have to make you happy, and it doesn't. And so the question is, what does make us happy? And I would suggest that it's very simple. It's relationships with other human beings, right? There's some other things as well, but we'll just hang our hat on that one. So let's go over to page 4, just really quickly. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Wonderful words. Absolutely. And then the Constitution, the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish and ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and the securing of blessings to ourselves, of blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. Love it. If you don't read it and your heart doesn't do an uptick, there's something wrong with you. Or you got heartburn. Right? Love it. Great words. But what is also happening simultaneously as these words, the ink is drying from the quill in which these words were written, what is also simultaneously happening? The transatlantic slave trade is also happening. And so we've been wrestling to make sure that we create an atmosphere where all humanity is recognized by these great words. So we've made tons of little steps, and we keep making steps, and we'll keep making steps because the challenges are real. So 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation happens. 1920s, the 19th Amendment happens. 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act happens, where Native Americans can be American citizens without any other restrictions or qualifications, right? Strikes me as odd. I don't know. 1924 strikes me as odd. 1964, Civil Rights Act is signed. 1978, American Native Religion Act is signed, meaning that Native Americans in 1978 can now worship how they wish. in a country so-called founded on religious freedoms. And then 1990, Americans with Disabilities Act is signed, and we also know that DOMA has come up, and so the Freedom of Religion Act, Freedom of Marriage Act is something that is still on the table and on a national platform, but certainly has been supported here locally in the state of Minnesota. And so we know that those are all steps to guarantee all people's humanity. So wonderful, wonderful stuff. I'm doing such a good job on my time. I'm like, oh, I got like 2 minutes, right? Yes. So what I'd like to do is let's go over to page 6, if you will. And I think it's very interesting that there's lots of conversations about millennials, and we talk a lot to millennials, but we also have to recognize that millennials are coming out of a context. And part of that context means that they have grown up in a world where there has always been the internet. That is a profound reality. Profound reality. So in my household, we have this thing called, so we have 2 things. We have 2 assistants in our house. One is called Alexa. She's an assistant. And we also have this other assistant called Google Home. And so my daughter is out in the world, and we're at a Smash Burger, and she's sitting there, and she says, Google, play Octonauts. At home, when my daughter says that, Octonaut shows up on the television. But now that we're out in Smashburger, it's not working. And she's confused as to why Google, play Octonauts. Google's not playing Octonauts because Google's only at home. So we had to teach her that Google is only at home. So not only is she growing up in a world where there's always the internet, you can actually talk to the internet and it will do the stuff you say do. I hate to be her manager. It's funny. Has anyone noticed how difficult it is to get a face-to-face meeting with folks? So one of my tools that people are always using is this idea of doodle, and they're like, just doodle me. Just doodle me, man. If we want to meet, let's doodle. Anybody seen doodle? Right? So it's a meeting organizer, and it puts all the calendars together, right? Blah, 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 blah. So there's some common traits, and I'll let you read page 6 on your own. Important to recognize that on the top of page 7 is all the ways in which we are different and similar, and we're trying to do all of this stuff, but time constantly changes, and we come directly out of context. At the bottom of page 7 is how to deal with baby boomers. The most important thing that I wish I had more time to spend because I wasted my time, I apologize for that, is this idea of nonviolent communication and the 4 agreements. What I would suggest with nonviolent communication is that nonviolent communication is this concept that in my communication, I don't want to hurt you. And the recognition that there are 3 things happening in communication simultaneously. That there are emotions that are happening in our communication, that there are relationship issues that happen in our communication, and then there is the thing that we're talking about in our communication. An example of that is a bad example, but I think one that many people can relate to is when a partner or a friend asks you, how do I look in this item? There are 3 things at stake, right? The relationship, the emotion, and then the actual thing that we're talking about, right? So nonviolent communication says we take those things into account. And then lastly, the 4 agreements, I think, provide excellence in communication and in the workplace. That, number 1, be impeccable with your word, whether that word is in person or via text. Text is such an easy way to punk out of not keeping your word, right? Because it's easy to just say a thing or do a thing without having a face-to-face responsibility for what I'm saying. Secondly, is don't take anything personally. Did you know that what you think about what somebody else does not prevent them from doing it? That nobody ever does anything because of you, typically, right? Next is this idea, don't make assumptions about things. If you want to be clear in your communication, if you want to work across these generational lines, don't make assumptions. I had a young lady who got in a lot of trouble because she's a first-year teacher, and she had a complaint about her school, so she wrote the school board. What's the problem? She missed the whole chain of command. But guess what else is the problem? Nobody ever told her about a chain of command. So how was she supposed to know about a chain of command? They just assumed that she would know, right? Excuse me. And lastly, do your best in communication, in everything that you do your best. You will always fail when you compare yourself to somebody else. You will either overassume or you will underperform based on what somebody else does. So always do your best throughout your relationships with your colleagues and with your employer. My name is Andre Koen. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Have a great day.